Hey guys, welcome back to Panhandle Pulse. I got a great guest in Mike Uhler today. He's going to talk about his great experience. He's an expert at business acquisitions, strategy investments, and entrepreneur growth. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Chuck. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Good. I think our listeners are going to be excited to hear your background. So, if you can share how you got started in your entrepreneurial journey and what led you to focusing on business acquisitions.
Absolutely. Well, I started this when I was 17 years old, and it was a service business that I started by myself. I was the only provider, and I grew that to 40 employees over about 9 years, and then it ended up selling it. And I sell it several times before I finally was able to, because really the business was running me and I was not running it. And so once I finally got that dialed in and was able to sell it to a gentleman who had 5 kids and was a corporate executive and wanted to buy my job, the way I looked at it, for more money than I could have imagined, I became very by this idea of people being able to build income producing assets, which are businesses, them to people who want. And so I joined a bit at that point and then ended up owning my own brokerage 28 years, I've been helping people buy, sell, finance, and partner in. And for about 20 years, I've actually been buying and owning them as well. So I currently have an active ownership uh, and management role in about 20 different businesses, as well as being a broker.
Okay, good. So what are some of the people that's out there looking to get started in doing a business acquisition, or say they're starting to get that entrepreneur itch that you recommend them going at first?
Well, there's a core distinction. You know, a lot of people think about starting a business being cheaper. And the reality is, when in my experience, and again, I've closed 800 transactions, I've been in the middle of those. So in my experience, when you buy a business established, not only does the risk go down, but for most of the people that I would guess are in your listener group, it you can do the math. So when you go to start a business, you never know how long, and I've started businesses before.
Yep.
You never know how long it's going to take before you're profitable. It's hard to know if the location is great, if it's location specific. It can be hard to hire employees. All of these things are what I would refer to as reinventing the wheel. And when somebody buys a business, ideally they're buying a recipe, which is like with cooking in the kitchen. It's a recipe for getting a specific result. And so ideally, when you buy a business, the buyer is able to do the math to determine, had they owned the business last year, how much would they have made? If they owned it the year before that, how much would they have made to support their life? When it's evaluated, I'll say correctly, a buyer can walk into buying a business with a much greater level of certainty about, we're going to be fine financially, break the business or something catastrophic doesn't happen. They ought to get the same result that the previous owner did.
Yeah, and that's a good point because you're taking an establishment of a business that may be well established or not a business, but has some processes in place that you won't have to set up as a first time entrepreneur.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And when you go to make some decisions on what your key aspects are for, say, acquiring a business, particularly in the area we have a lot of beach chair rentals, golf cart businesses, and a whole slew of activities to support tourists down here. What kind of decision factors do you start putting into place that people can go and look to evaluate that?
Yeah, well, when I work with clients, there's a handful. Let's just say there's 4 that I like to walk through and be the financial feasibility. And that, to a large extent, can really kind of cover the first and second principle, but it's really, how much does the buyer need to earn? So if somebody's leaving a career earning 100,000 a year, well, then they really need a business that's going to generate at least 100,000 a year and enough to cover the debt service if they end up getting a loan for the business. So that's kind of one factor, is just that basic, how much do you need to live on for a buyer? Next is, how much do they have available to buy the business with? So those things determine, to a large extent, what they should be shopping for from a financial perspective. And then there's an element also of core competency. And what I refer to as core competency is, if, as an example, I had a gentleman who called me a few weeks ago who was interested in buying an HVAC company that I'm aware of being available for sale, and he's in the IT world. And actually, he's going to be a great example for 2 points. Um,
Yeah.
so he does not have any background in HVAC, right? And so the risk goes up. Now, a lot
Right.
of people, they want to do something totally different, right? I want to get into something totally different. But in that gentleman's example, he could get himself in a whole lot of trouble buying a business that's as complicated as HVAC, where he has no core competency, no background in that industry. So again, I'm very risk adverse personally, and so for somebody who's looking at buying a business, for them to evaluate a business where they've got some skill set, some core competency into the business they want to buy, it's a it's a huge factor.
Yeah.
And then another factor is what I call proximity. There's a lot of popular social media out there right at the moment that you can buy a laundromat and on the other side or a HVAC company and 6 states away or whatever. I own it. It's hard enough to run them when they're close,
Right.
you know? And so the risk goes way up if the proximity is potentially a detriment. And so this telling me about the HVAC company, he was not going to leave Pennsylvania. He wanted to buy an HVAC company in Arizona. And not only did he not have the core competency, but he didn't have the proximity. And, quite frankly, Chuck, I talked with him and I said, listen, I don't want to see you get hurt. And let me just walk you through this. The employee who's doing estimates for you and you're in Pennsylvania and they're in Arizona, how are you going to know if they're bidding these jobs correctly or not
Right.
without having any background? That I would hire somebody else. It's okay. How are you going to know how to hire the next person if you don't know how to interview them? Just kind of went down there. Okay, the key employee quits. Are you going to fly out here and you're going to step into that role? Are you going to be able to talk with customers enough about what they need in their home? So it's really a very harsh example of how these things can be a challenge. So ideally, a buyer is looking for some background, they've got some excitement. It's close enough that they can manage it without destroying their lifestyle if there's a problem, and it meets their financial down payment ability, and it meets their financial income needs. So those would be the four fundamentals that just kind of help separate a lot of the static.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, especially for going into a new field. Like I'm in tech as well, but going that and HVAC is totally different. There's tech components behind it, but it's nothing
Right.
like computers and that to it. So, location, proximity, and buying something that you have some familiarity with is key. What are some of the keys to look at from a financial structure of it? So let's say you're leaving your W-2 business and you're looking to acquire the business. How are those financial structures usually work? Because sometimes you got to go to a bank or you can do owner finance or walk us through some of those stages.
Yeah. So the good news is that businesses that make more about that, but businesses that make financial sense are very readily financeable. And so a buyer can buy a business that makes financial sense with as little as 10% down. Now, I tell people, listen, plan on 12, plan on 15,
Yeah.
but as long as the business makes it's a pretty minimal down. And then the lender is going to do exactly what you just asked. They're going to make sure that the business can afford to pay for itself, meaning cover its payments and debt, and support the new owner. Ideally, for us as potential business buyers, we want to know how to do that in advance. So, example, if we have somebody who's a customer a year and they're going to get a bank loan for a business, then more than likely they need to be shopping for businesses that 150 and 200,000 a year in what would be called discretionary earnings. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't buy more if they have the down payment, but it just sets a guardrail and some search criteria to kind of narrow that down.
Yeah. And you guys help with help focusing on that and narrowing that down for people looking to buy businesses all over the states.
We do, and so I mentioned that I've been a broker, but a couple of years ago, and what brings me to you, Chuck, is that I started an education and training company to help people learn more about how to buy, sell, and finance businesses, for a couple of reasons. One is there's a whole lot of information out there that just, in my opinion, simplify this process. And then I'm getting calls from people who are getting hurt.
Right.
They jumped into a deal and they're like, now they have to file bankruptcy because they didn't know the rules of the road. And unlike in real estate, there's a whole lot of education out there about buying fix and flips and multifamily and apartment complexes and all these things. In the business acquisition world, there is not as much information. And there's not as much information, frankly, having done this for as long as I have and seen as many deals as I have. There's some very simple understandings that can help somebody avoid those devastating financial issues just by being able to think it through a little bit with some guardrails.
Yeah, and that's key. I think finding those guardrails to go over, like you said, the 4 steps of making sure that you have some viability in the business, you have some knowledge, and you're in close proximity to that too. What are some of the, if you're looking at a business, let's say we can use an example, the golf cart business of where we are, and they're right on the borderline of being a successful business, but you feel like it just is missing marketing or something additional on top of that. How would you advise people to look at that where they think they could grow it or to exit by the next couple of years?
It's a great question. I'm actually working on a deal right now. It's for a business that I'm buying. I'm participating as a buyer in, and the fundamentals of the business are very strong, right? And so they make financial sense, and that all works. And it's important, at least for me. My philosophy is it works because it's a recipe. And just like you wouldn't necessarily, unless you were a master chef, you wouldn't walk into the kitchen and decide to just totally change up the recipe by adding, 4 more eggs to the cake batter and skipping. I'm not a chef, so I don't even know what you would skip on the other side, but just taking all these, well, then you just destroyed the recipe.
Yep.
So my approach to this is that when I'm buying a business, I go in and I'm trying to follow the recipe as closely as I can because I want the same result. And the opportunities that I see are there, but I try not to implement much change until I totally understand the operation the way it was before getting the result. Now, as business owners, us that are business owners, every single day that we have to deal with, right? And you may need to change the recipe even when you don't want to. But when you buy a business, it's much safer for the buyer to get really good at fulfilling the recipe that they have, meaning operating the business the way it's been in the past and saying, you know what, I'm making all the money I thought I was supposed to, and it's working. And then saying, you know what, I think if I turn up the dial for this service as well, if right, and you're just tweaking it a little bit to really grow it and make it even better than what it was.
Yeah, that's great advice, especially just small changes at the beginning until you get an understanding of how the business was functioning. Is there a time frame of when you look at businesses to acquire that they must be established for multiple years beforehand? Or let's say somebody came down and did a great year in their first year, but are now relocating because they don't like the area back. What kind of strategy behind that?
Yeah. Well, if we follow the principle like we're buying a recipe, then ideally back and look at 2, 3, 4 years of history to determine that recipe delivered the result. And so it doesn't mean that we can't buy a business with only 1 year history, but it just adds a little bit of an element of risk, right? We don't know if that's the best year they're ever going to have, or if so the law of averages is very powerful in my world. And so being years of information and say, okay, well, if I had owned it in 22, here's what I would have made. If and you're able to say, okay, I can live with that. The likelihood of being able to get the same result in 26, 27, 28 is very great for your history. And then the other piece that I'll add to your question is that the level of complexity related to the business is also a factor. So if it's a very simple business model, and I'll use your example of beach rentals as an example or something. There's not an enormous level of complexity there. Then maybe you don't need tons of history, right? It's not. But if you were buying an HVAC company, and as our previous example, 2, 3, 4 years might be appropriate. It's like, okay, well, let's take even though COVID wouldn't fit into that. Okay, we got the COVID, we got the interest rates increased, and people had less money. I mean, so you're able to see all of those in the numbers of the business to help guide your decision.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. And what's typically you see, I know you've done hundreds of deals you're talking about. Where do deals go sideways, or where do businesses go sideways after someone acquired them? What are some key areas to look for?
That's another great question. And this is what drives me, because nobody wants to buy something. I talked a few weeks ago who called me. She bought a business. I wasn't involved in the transaction, but she bought it and wanted me to sell it for her. But she had only owned it for 6 months. She bought it 6 months prior, and is literally filing bankruptcy. So it's a horrible story, right?
Yeah.
And for it to go that bad that quick, there has to be some fundamental things that are wrong. And so, number one, if somebody buys a business using seller financing, it doesn't, there isn't the required financial sense like it is when you go through a bank.
Okay.
So a lender won't, I mean, a cash flow lender will not let you, doesn't make financial sense. So one caution, I guess, is there's a lot of talk out there about how great seller financing is. If it's going to be seller financed, I recommend that the buyer does their homework to make sure that it makes financial sense, that they've looked at the law of averages and the financial feasibility to make sure that it's going to provide. But probably the single biggest issue that I see with people after they buy a business not succeeding is that they change the recipe.
Right.
So a lot of people get excited that they can't wait to buy the business, and they're going to make I can't wait to do this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to. And when I've helped people buy a business and they start to get in a tight spot, the first thing I tell them I think we need to do is to go early. That's the recipe. Inevitably, it's like, well, how come you're having so much trouble installing the product? I mean, Jimmy had been installing them for,
Right.
well, why more? But we let our cousin needed a job, and so now he's the installer. Okay, well, you just got rid of one of the key people that, and then it's, well, we discounted prices. We wanted to do more volume. So we cut prices, and okay, so now you're not making them. So it's usually those changes, and buyers, unfortunately, and then the next week they made two more. And then before you know it, they just have a whole different cake using my recipe, and it doesn't taste good. Right.
Right.
So
Right. You've come in, you're all excited, you made too many changes across there, and now you can't recover from it.
that is the best way to avoid having. And the other thing that I'll on this line is that is when make us the business. Let's say that, in my opinion, the relationship with the previous owner is a crucial relationship. It's not like buying a car or a house where it never matters who owned it.
Okay.
Ideally, I want to be able to go back. If I'm buying a business, I want to be able to go back to the previous owner and say, listen, I'm thinking about doing this thing. I'm going to get rid of the old pickup trucks and buy new because it seems like the maintenance costs are exceeding the value of the, like, what would you do? And
Right.
and that can be an enormous resource to say, well, I tried that before. Here's what I learned, or any of that. So slow and steady wins the race when you're buying a recipe that's proven to create a result, and trying not to change the recipe too much, too quickly, is important.
Definitely, especially if you have existing customers in the area that like everything that's been going on. You don't want to go in and do a complete change in the first 6 months. So, in your recommendations, what are some good businesses to look at buying? What kind of industries, what kind of business backgrounds, or in general that you would recommend people start looking for?
I really look at it as a industry in general. Then people go back to their core competence. I can give you. I'm working with a couple navigate this buying process. And this gentleman's a project manager role for the equipment. It involves subcontractors. It involves the jobs that they complete. and he has core competency.
We'll flip over to the education side of the house that you're doing, that you're being able to educate entrepreneurs and W-2 people. What's some of the things that we can start doing to get ourselves smarter in that before we go out looking for a business and want to make a change?
Yeah, getting some either A, basic knowledge or very specific knowledge. And so there test, of course, it's called What's Your Deal? And that's, we take a deep dive into financing and we interview buyers who have bought businesses and how it worked out and previous business owners and those kinds of things. And there are others out there, but getting used to the language and the conversations that relate to this industry is a great way. And then as somebody becomes more proficient with it, especially if they're going to need financing, they're going to need to have their financial affairs in an order. And so that can be having a personal financial statement created, having a resume or biography created. These are all things that people can start doing to get their arms around what's going to be needed for them to shop with credibility and efficiency. And then the other piece, I think, is once they're ready to start shopping, to actually start getting files on businesses. And what that means is that if Chuck, if you were to call a business broker in your area right now and say, listen, I want to know more about that beach rental equipment company, ideally, and the reason I say ideally is because it doesn't always happen that way, but ideally, they're going to send you a phenomenal file. And that file is going to include 3 years of tax returns and 3 years of financial statements and a list of the equipment and a copy of the lease and all these things. And so as you're working through that as a prospective buyer, you're going to start to get a lot more understanding about how these things are packaged in, what you're looking for and what you like and what you don't like. And so that's a great way to also start getting proficient in this world of buying businesses so that you're better at it once you find the best one if you don't find it right off the bat.
Yeah, and so with that process, you actually will open up students and people that's interested into different business ideas that they may not have thought of. So you encourage them to look at more opportunities outside those files and look at a bunch of different business opportunities to understand beforehand.
I really do. Yeah. One of the things I do webinars and things like that as well. And one of the things I've done is we call it a deal or no deal. And I'll bring a file to the group and we'll start hacking away at this thing. Okay, what do we like? What do we see in this financial statement that jumps out at us? And people will comment, oh, the revenue's up, revenue's down, the payroll's too high. And so in walking through that, you get really good at it pretty quick.
Yeah.
And so that's the same thing outside of a format where I'm guiding it, where somebody can do the same thing and they're just highlighting stuff like, well, I wonder why this is. And I wonder, that's interesting. I don't love that. Or why did sales drop, 40% last year?
Yeah.
Those are great things for people to get accustomed to training themselves to look for because it matters. We're
Yeah.
buying an income producing asset, just like if you were buying an apartment complex or a duplex or townhome or something. It's the math is important.
Yeah, especially for something that you're getting outside, new it completely to you to run a business out of a 9 to 5 job. And so you
Yes.
guys offer training resources around that to help them go through the deal or no deal. And do you also help work with clients to find businesses for them in certain areas as well too?
I do. So yes, we offer training, education, and coaching on these topics. Finding businesses in other areas can be super challenging because, and this is probably would be beneficial for your audience to hear as well, because it's not as refined as residential real estate or even commercial real estate. The business brokers that I've come across, all not uncommon for me to hear that people call a business broker or five of them and never got a phone call back. And they've emailed and they're not getting a response. And why that is, I could speculate, but it's a little bit challenging. So one of the things I teach people is how to work with brokers and how to show up for that broker in a way that they want to see. Meaning you come with enough credentials and education where the broker goes, okay, I might have a chance of selling this thing to this person. But number two, how to find a business with no broker. Because if there's not, I just helped a gentleman buy a business that had been looking for 10 years That's a long time.
That is a long time.
Oh my gosh. And he finally found one and was able to buy it. So it's one thing to wait for a broker to put it on the market, but it's another thing to be able to dial in, which is what I help people do, to dial in on their core competencies, their financial abilities, the financial feasibility, proximity. And then they can literally go target industries that would be of interest to them and ideally put together a deal. And that may sound really difficult, but it's actually not as hard as you might think. And I've got 2 transactions right now that are happening simply through that process.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna follow up on. How do you so let's say we went through training, we got an idea of looking through what a package would look like, and now we're just out vetting businesses in our own area that we see as interest. What's the next steps to approach that business to see if there's interest?
Yeah, if it's not listed,
Yes.
yeah, great question. So most business owners don't want their employees to know that the business is for sale. And I can explain that a little bit more, but it actually is beneficial to the buyer as well to not have the staff know that the business is for sale. So if you're going to approach a business owner and find out if they're interested in selling, it would either be through a letter, it would be through a personal connection, like a friend who knows somebody who whatever, or literally approaching the owner if you can connect with them in a way that nobody can overhear it.
Gotcha.
And it's usually just very discreet. And in my opinion, it goes something like, whether it's in a written form or verbally, my name is Matt Uhler. I've been looking to buy a business for a long time. I am qualified to buy a business, and your business has caught my attention. Have you ever thought about selling your business? And they're either going to say yes, no, whatever. And however, almost every business owner has thought about it.
Right.
And it's amazing to me when I've approached people like that for whether a client or myself. They might say no, and then a month later they're going, you know what, I was talking with my wife, or my wife was talking to me, or whatever, and we would be curious to know what this looks like. So it's not as hard as people might think to get a reaction where somebody goes, it's funny you would call. We were just talking last night about this, or I've been thinking about it for 2 years, or whatever.
Right. So do the interaction. You never know what will come out of it when you do the reach out and engagement from it.
That's right.
Yeah. So as the guy 10 years, look, he was really persistent in trying to find a business when he got in touch with you and got going, didn't he?
That's right. So there's a little bit more to that story. He was employed while he was searching before. So
Okay.
again, he was looking and it would be nice to find one and whatever. But it was when he got laid off that then he had no more income. And that's honestly not the ideal time to take it serious, because
Right.
once you're laid off, depending on your severance package or whatever you might have, every day that you're not working, you're losing your down payment money. And so he started to feel the financial pressure of no income for an extended period of time, just trying to go through the process and financing and all of that to be able to buy the business that he bought.
Right.
And if you don't mind, let me go one level deeper on that, because again, in our intent to avoid pain, right?
Yeah.
I've also seen people who start looking for a business after they've lost their income and end up buying it and they have no more operating capital because they don't have it. And
Right.
that's can be devastating, because then they don't have the money they need to run the business. And so people can end up being forced into making decisions they wouldn't make otherwise because of financial pressure they already have from what they did before, let alone what they're getting into. So it takes a little more persistence and discipline, but it's a whole lot more comfortable to be able to buy a business when you don't need one
Yeah.
than to have to try to find one and buy something, because otherwise you won't have your down payment left anymore because you're living on it every day. So
Right. And it's hard sometimes not to make those rash decisions around there. And then it goes back to exactly what you're saying. Make sure you're planning your financial plan for the next year and 6 months of that business is solid.
yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And with everyone now looking, I mean, it's the way we are going into the new century with AI and everything taken over from us, and small businesses, laundromats, Airbnbs, everyone's trying to become an entrepreneur. Do you see it's better to go after an existing business that's got revenue in there, or how do you compare that to like a chain if you're going to buy into like a brand of chains?
Yeah. Um, so franchises, the reason franchises exist is because they've developed a recipe that's duplicatable, and then they teach people how to open that same business or buy an existing one. But let's just say open that same business in a new area with a proven model, right? So, and that can be great. However, if you're buying a business, you're buying a recipe that
Yeah,
already has a proven history in a specific area. So, uh, franchises have their benefit. I've also seen people buy franchises, open them in an area, and not get the result they wanted because it's still a new business.
yeah,
And so, and there's also another element of this. It, you know, the a lot of times the people that are selling franchise territories get paid when they're selling them. It does not that they shouldn't, not that they don't care. I wish they would care how the
right.
business does on the other side, but they did their job. They sold the territory.
Yeah,
And I think it comes right back to the same fundamentals, which is making sure it makes financial sense and that you've got your financial affairs in order and that you can ideally look at some history and decide that it's worth doing. A lot of the people that I work with don't want to pay the royalty to a franchise if they don't need it. And the
right.
the royalty is for anybody who might not know, the royalty is a percentage of the revenue that the franchisor keeps because you ideally are benefiting from their brand, right?
Yep.
And so the buyer of that business oftentimes ends up needing to quantify, am I really getting the benefit of this brand? And there are certainly brands, without naming them, there are certainly brands that carry a whole lot of credibility and people will pull into them just simply because of the sign.
Yeah,
There are other brands where is it really carrying any weight? But you're
right.
you're paying for it every single month through a royalty. So it's a decision that needs to be made and evaluated. One advantage of a franchise is they have refined the recipe and they have support. And so if somebody's getting into a business where they don't have core competency or where they're really stepping out on a limb, having that team can be helpful to make sure that you're okay moving forward and you get the support you need. So
Yeah, I agree with that saying. I mean, sometimes established businesses in the area that have name and brand recognition that was created are sometimes even better than going after a franchise because even Starbucks with it, the recognition they have fail. I think you can guarantee if you put a Chick-fil-A anywhere, it's going to do excellent, but you can't guarantee a Subway or a Starbucks is going to do the same. But the day one, Chick-fil-A will be packed until it closes every day. So sometimes it's better to get the HVAC company or the mom and pop pizza company down the road than buying a franchise.
you're absolutely right. Yep. And those are great
Yeah.
examples that you shared.
So, what are some of the things that you would encourage people to go do before they make this decision? Just some basic, like 1, 2, 3 steps of, look, I'm working 9 to 5 right now. I'm thinking of getting out of here. Should I start with some education with you to think about how I do this before I start going look at businesses, or should they start putting a list together of businesses that they want to buy and then come to you? Give us some just practical steps.
Yeah. I think honestly, getting education wherever they can find it, and if it's through me, that's great. Love to help. Um, Goes a long way because what some people might find is they go out shopping and find one right away, and before they know it, they're already in it. And so again, I think a little education. Maybe we could use like a driving a car analogy because I have a son who's learning how to, as opposed to him just taking a spin before he knows how to drive, probably not as good an idea as getting a little education first. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think I would use that to say it's really easy to get education, even if it's just listening to podcasts to get familiar with that. But most of us don't know what we don't know until we discover it. And so when we dive into an area and I mean, I still do this today where I decide I want to try something new. It shocks me what I don't know. And then
Right.
I become aware of what I don't know and that gives me some direction. So I think education is number one. And then number two, for some people, maybe they shouldn't be self-employed. It's like, it comes to some soul searching. I mean, am I disciplined enough to be my own boss? Or
Right.
do I really do better with somebody telling me, here's where you need to be and here's what I want you to do? Do I like managing people or do I not? So maybe you're buying a business with no employees because that serves you better, or maybe you're buying it, so looking at your personal, um, your personal inventory of, is this really the right thing for me to do? And then another thing that I find a lot of people they'll way overshoot the mark. I mean, I talk with people all the time and coach them, and they're shopping for $3 million businesses, $5 million businesses. I've actually coached people who are under contract on a $5 million business, and there is no way on the planet that they could afford to buy it.
Yeah.
So they literally got into a contract and potentially losing earnest money and all this stuff. And great people. They just didn't understand the financial implications of, can they perform or not?
Right.
And so, um, back to your question, a little bit of education, taking a personal inventory on, is it the right thing to do or not? And then getting some of these financial parameters in place so that when they start shopping, they're shopping in the right area, as opposed to just throwing darts and potentially end up in a contract on something that, you know, they might be very, very sorry they ended up getting if they got it.
Right. Now, I think you hit on a key point there, checking your personal inventory and understanding your key assets and where you are. Because if you're a people person and you may not be the best person to deal with business of firing people because the way the emotions go in. So figuring that out on step one before you go into it is a huge benefit that most of us don't think about until you're too late into it.
Yeah. And
Eh,
these aren't, businesses aren't what I would call a liquid asset. They can be sold, of course, that happens every day, but it's not, I think the idea that you're going to get into a business and fix and flip it or something is guided, unless you've done that a lot in the past and you've got a whole lot of business experience. For most people, flipping a business is not something that they should really count on being able to do.
Right. Yeah, because you did an example 6 months later, someone was in and it's hard to sell and get rid of. So it's
Mhm.
not as easy to backtrack once you get into it.
No, not that's for sure.
If you had a crystal ball for the next 5, 10 years, what industries do you think are going to be more up for sale as the next generation is retiring and looking to sell and would be potentially good to look at as an investment in starting your business strategy?
Well, you may have heard of the silver tsunami. It's referring to the baby boomer generation that is retiring. They're just ready to be done.
Yep.
And so many of the people in the baby boomer generation right now, matter of fact, for my entire career, it's amazing to me how few of the children of successful business owners want that business. So a lot of them just want nothing to do with that business. And
Yeah.
so it either A, becomes available for sale, or literally they just close it. And
Right.
the idea of closing a business because you're done with it is shocking to me, because I sell them all the time. So they are a saleable asset. But it'd be like deciding you're going to move out of your house and just you're going to bulldoze your house or set it on fire
Right.
or something instead of selling it. you know. So I think what buyers are going to see, to answer your question, I think what prospective buyers are going to see is a huge influx of inventory of businesses available. And from a perspective, I think AI is a phenomenal tool. I use it a lot, but I can tell you, as of today, it does not replace me.
Right.
It's a great tool. However, I think back to the crystal ball, if we look at service businesses and trades and things like that, I think they're going to be much more isolated from being able to simply take over
Mhm.
than some other types of businesses. And so certainly, when I'm looking at what it is I'm buying today as a entrepreneur who likes to buy businesses, that's a consideration. And the evolution is speeding up. And so I think what we see is that things are happening much, much quicker than they used to, and industries that used to just be a mainstay are gone. And so
Right.
it's important for us to look ahead and ideally look at this as a long-term asset that ultimately we want to be able to sell for a substantial amount of money and be able to move on to whatever's
Yeah.
next.
That's a great point. I mean, especially from the older generation retiring. My dad was in that age generation of retiring businesses. That's one thing I don't think that generation thinks of so much of, oh, I'm going to close this. I was going to give it to my family or my children to take over, that they need to actually think out and look and reach out to brokers to be able to market and sell their business. as
Mhm.
well.
Takes time to prepare a business for sale in most cases. So
Yeah.
ideally, somebody who's thinking about wanting to sell in a year or 2, they start preparing now to be able to benefit when it's time.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I always ask guests on the show, it covers for the Panhandle here, but pretty much everywhere. Like, what do you see as the biggest issue right now that needs to be addressed from an entrepreneur or business perspective that's holding people and communities back?
Oh, man, Chuck. There's
I
oh,
know there's a lot more than the one thing, but
right. I think there's, al and in my businesses, what I'm seeing is a issue regarding, um, staff and people wanting to work. And there's an entitlement that I think has been passed down for quite some time and encouraged for a long time that is making it challenging for business owners of any kind to provide the quality and service that people are accustomed to and deserve for what they're paying for. And so I think uh, I'm not sure what the solution to is for that, but I do think if there are people listening who are aspiring, get good at doing what you say you're going to do and show up on time and be disciplined and all of those things that are appropriate for earning whatever the appropriate compensation is a huge step in the right direction to be able to excel and literally stand out in today's market
yeah,
because so many people just feel like they should be handed things for no effort and it is not what our country was built on. So
it's absolutely a huge point that we see. And Kevin was on here, another business owner, and I think he's seen that when he moved into the area. But training his staff and motivating his staff, not just as employees, but being a small business, you can give them opportunity to grow and leave and flourish from there, which has been huge for those guys in there. So that's, you hit it right on the head. It's going to be hard to change, but hopefully in the next decade here, we'll make some shifts in that direction.
that would be great to see.
Yeah, it'd be excellent. Well, thanks for being on today. Tell our guests on here how they find you on social media, how they get your training programs and broker services.
Yeah, absolutely, Chuck. It's been a pleasure. So the name of my training company is called Amped Success. And so if you go to Amped Success, whether it's Instagram or YouTube or ampedsuccess.com, you'll find me and the services I provide, whether that's brokerage, education, training, even assistance with financing. I've essentially taken all of the things that I've been doing for 28 years and developed them into different divisions with partners to make sure we deliver to anybody we can help exactly what they need.
Perfect. Yeah, it's a one-stop shop for everywhere when you want to get started. So I appreciate it.
Well, thanks, Chuck. Thanks for having me again.